Hello, Jim Howard here in Fort Worth, Texas. Today's date, it is July 9th of 2016. I didn't want to comment on this, the shootings, the everything, but I guess I've got to. From my not that you've been demanding or even asking, just got to give you my 2 cents. This is unscripted. I don't have any notes. I should make notes. I should have a script. I I don't. So no telling where in the hell I'll end up. But wanted to talk about it, and I'm not there since I don't have a script. It's not going to be in any orderly script fashion. So may put some things because something's number one doesn't mean it's maybe the most important or point that I wanted to make. But first of all, I wanted to say that the the protest the other day in Dallas, and there were protests across the United States, was remarkable when it started out because of the way the Dallas police and the nonviolent protesters were handling this situation. I'm sure you've seen on the news there was pictures of protesters and the police, arms around each other, people taking pictures, and everything was going really well. The protesters were protesting, exercising their First Amendment right, doing it peacefully, the way it's supposed to work. Our Constitution was being honored and respected. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, was being respected, and everything was going so well. And then one person shot and killed, what was it, 5 police officers, and I'm not sure exactly if they was it wounded 11. I think there were a couple of citizens that were wounded, and their protesters are black protesters. Well, of course, there were other people in there also. It wasn't just a black protest. It was citizens of Dallas, and I'm sure surrounding areas, protesting peaceably for an end to violence, for an end to people being killed. And you have this individual who apparently was upset by the deaths of black men by police officers, and he then, he's opposed to the violence and the injustice of it, and then what does he do? Commits this horrendous violence and hatred. Just that type of stuff happens all the time. There was some comments made on the news media someplace. I think it was by news commentators, by the media. I think they were showing the police officers who had been killed as their bodies were being moved from the hospital, I think, to the coroner's office, or from the coroner's office to the funeral home. I can't remember which. And the police cars were lined up, and their fellow officers were. And something was said that, and I can't remember exactly what it was. about uh, how difficult it would be for the officers, the Dallas police officers, and how things would be altered or changed, sort of indicating that it wouldn't be business as normal. I worked back in the 70s at a small hospital, 350-bed hospital, working security. And we had 10 security officers there, and we had, during the time I worked there, 2 of them shot. Dan Stagel was shot and permanently disabled. And then later on, John Galegas was shot and killed. He managed to shoot the person who shot him. Dan Stagel, John Galegas, both of them, but I came into work, when I came into work, the PM shift, no, I was coming into work, no, I'd worked the day shift. I was getting ready to go home, and John Galegas came on to relieve me, and I was shining my shoes. We had a kit there in the office, and we had a little overlap in security of a few minutes, so I was shining my shoes, and John came in and joked with me that, at my age I hadn't learned how to properly shine shoes, and so he said, "Here, let me do that for you." So he shined my shoes, and we talked a little bit, and then I went home, and then a few hours later, at 9:15 p.m., he was dead. I came in the next morning to go to work, and his bloody uniform was there and some other stuff in a bag to be picked up by the police department for, evidence and what have you. Nothing changed when that happened. I came in and I had to do the very same thing that I did every day, and all the other security officers had to do the very same thing that they did every day. There was no change. Dan Stagel, the first security officer who was shot, he was also shot at 9:15 p.m. in the very same parking lot. And when he was in the intensive care unit and not able to work or whatever, of course, I went over and I took his spot on the second shift. And nothing changed. Then I eventually went to the midnight shift and then back to the day shift, and then John Galegas was shot and killed in the parking lot. I want to comment because something else just popped in my mind. A couple things. Let me talk about, number one, John Galegas was in the parking lot at 9:15, and the inside officer came out and said, "John, do you want to take a break?" They usually did break about 9 o'clock or 9:15, right in there. And John said, "No, I'll just stay here in the parking lot rather than go in for a few minutes and come back out." And it was a really bad area that St. Joseph Hospital was located in Kansas City, Missouri. If you're familiar, after the 70s, if you're familiar with Kansas City, Missouri, you're going to say Jim Howard's wrong. That St. Joe Hospital is in a real nice area of Kansas City, Missouri. No, the nuns moved the hospital after the second shooting. They probably would have moved it anyway because of the nuns told some venial sins. They told the community there, predominantly black community. I know because I used to live in that area when I was in high school, and it was black then, 90% black. But the nuns said that they weren't moving the hospital because of the area. They were moving because they were required to put new fire escapes on, and it would be cheaper just to move to a new location. I'm sure God forgives them for their venial sin of lying to the community. So they moved way out south into a area that was and still is, I'm sure, 95%, or let's say 90% white. But John was in the parking lot at 9:15, and you didn't stay. We had a guard shack out there that even had a restroom attached to it. But you didn't at night stay in that shack. It was not good to be in that shack. Before the hospital used to use Pinkerton. All the hospitals did a long time ago, contract security, and that didn't work out. And all the hospitals, except for one, over the years went to their own security, in-house security. But before the nuns went to hiring their own security officers, they contacted the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department to get off-duty police officers to work. And the nuns said, well, we'll need a security officer for the park, or a off-duty police officer for the parking lot, and then we'll need an off-duty officer for inside the hospital. And the police department said, no, because of the neighborhood, we won't give you one off-duty. They have to be two together at all times. So the nuns went with hiring in-house security. That's how bad the neighborhood was. John was in the parking lot, and he didn't stay in the shack. And when I worked the second shift, I didn't stay in the shack. And we didn't actually on midnights, just a little while. When I worked the midnight shift, there would be one of us would be in the parking lot, and then there was nobody in the parking lot after, I forget what time, 11 or 12 or something. So John was in the parking lot and not staying in the shack. And the perpetrator, there was this Wabash parking lot had a doctor's parking lot, and then for visitors and employees area. And there was one entrance. Well, there was the entrance where you drive in off of Wabash into the parking lot. But there was, at the end of the doctor's parking lot, a church. And there was a gap in the fence where there should have been a gate. There wasn't. The two guys who shot Dan Stagel earlier, they both came through from the church parking lot into the doctor's parking lot and went up to Dan Stagel and said, "Is this the parking lot for St. Joe Hospital?" And he said, "Yes, it is." And one of them sprayed him with mace and the other shot him. And Dan Stagel managed to survive. It was sort of a miracle that he was able to survive. Normally at that time of night, you'd have an ER doctor and there wouldn't be another doctor in the hospital. There was a doctor who had just delivered a baby. There was a doctor who was a thoracic surgeon who was sick himself and had come to the hospital to pick up some medication for himself. And anyway, they managed to pull Dan through. But he was in the intensive care unit for a long time. I don't want to. Man, I was going to. Another thing popped in my mind. I don't want to get into the fact that it turns out that one of the, not the guy who shot Dan Stego, but uh, well, the guy who shot Dan Stego, shot him once, and then they wrestled with him as they tried to get Dan's gun out of his holster, and he was protecting. And when he collapsed on the pavement there of the Wabash parking lot, the guy who shot him said, "I'm going to shoot him again," and his partner said, "No, once is enough, don't shoot him." And then they took off down the street, and it turns out that the guy who shot him worked in food service. I'm not sure he worked then in food service or whether he came to work later, but I had some conversations with him, and that's another story that's kind of interesting. Back to my story. When Dan Stagel, no, we're talking about John Galegas. John Galegas, there was a car in the doctor's parking lot that was loaded up with, it was John Galegas' car. He was getting ready to go on vacation, and he took clothing and stuff down to the Tigua Indians in Mexico every year, or every time he went on vacation or whatever. So he had his car loaded up with stuff, and the perpetrator came through, just as the other two guys had come through earlier, came through from the church parking lot, through where there should have been a fence, because this our parking lot had it had these 10-foot high fences or whatever, and on top of that, razor, which is unusual. Hospitals always they hate putting up fences. They hate putting up anything that makes it look like the place is, a prison or so. But then they had this open gate, where there was no gate. So anyway, John's car was filled with stuff that he was going to take and this perpetrator came through, and talk about coincidence and small world or whatever. He saw that car, and John's car, and went over and started getting into the car to steal something. And John had a bad habit of walking around with his hand on the butt of resting his hand on the butt of his revolver. They both saw each other at the same time. They both threw at the same time. They both shot each other at the same time. And John was hit in the chest and went down, and he was dead. The other guy managed to jump the fence with a razor wire and collapsed on the next street over. This is running a little bit longer than what I wanted to, but because I've thought of a couple things. Actually, I didn't intend to tell the shooting part, but well, since it came up, let me step back. Well, let me go on with what I was going to mention. That Eugene Segan, 133, the district officer for the area of St. Joe Hospital, came by and pulled in the parking lot and said, "Oh, Jim, so sorry about John being killed." And he said, "What are you guys doing? Are you guys going to the funeral? How's that going to be handled?" And I said, "Well, the funeral's being held in the chapel here at the hospital, but I'll be staying here at the hospital, and one of the other security officers will be staying at the hospital, and then the rest of the guys will be going to, from here, they'll be going to the cemetery." And Eugene said, "No, Jim, you guys can go." He says, "I'll get Kansas City officers, and we'll take care of the hospital for you while you guys are at the cemetery. So KCPD showed up, Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. There was a police car with an officer in it. They weren't being paid, by the way, well, of course they were on duty. But there was a police car in the Wabash parking lot. Over at the emergency entrance, there was a police car. And at the front circular entrance, there was a police car. And I was in one of the pallbearers, and we went to this after John's funeral there at the hospital. Went to the cemetery, and when I came back, there was the Kansas City police officers were there. That was really nice of them. The Kansas City, Missouri Police Department also supplied motorcycle officers for the caravan. So since I'm at this point and I've already bored the hell out of you, and you wonder where in the hell I'm going with this, and I have no idea, except I do want to mention something. And when Dan Stagel was shot, the first security officer, I at home when I heard about it, I typed up because when Dan Stagel was I typed up a thing saying, to the administration of the hospital, number one, you need to get a gate up across and close off the entrance in from that church parking lot into the doctor's parking lot. Number two, you need to get bulletproof vests for all the security officers, which was kind of unusual. It was just about that time, I think, that Kansas City police department was going to bulletproof vest. And certainly no hospital security officers or any security officers anywhere were getting vests or whatever. And then number three, I said you need to sit down and administration needs to sit down and have a talk with your security officers. And I put in the thing that this is our demand that you do these three things, and this is not negotiable. So I signed it, and the other security officer who was coming on duty with me, he signed it, and the two security officers who were going to be going home for the midnight shift, they signed it, and we were all there out in the Wabash parking lot. And then one of them or two of them said, the security officer said, what about this non-negotiable? What does that mean? And I said, that means that they have to do it, that we're not requesting, we're not asking them to do this. We're telling them you need to get a gate up there, you need to get bulletproof vest, and you need to sit down and have a talk with us. And he said, well, what if they won't do it? And I said, we're not negotiating. This isn't, we're not saying, they will do it or else. Well, he said, what is or else? And I said, well, we can't fucking shoot them. They either do it or, we quit and let them see, what they want to do then. Oh, no, take my name off. Every one of the guys, oh, no, take my name off. So I retyped up the thing without the demand, and I signed it and turned it into administration that, this has happened and you need to put a gate across there, you need to get bulletproof vest, and you should sit down and talk with us about what we can do to improve security here, that an incident like this will happen again. Next time it may not be a security officer, it may be a member of the medical staff, may be an employee, may be a patient, may be a visitor. And I turned it into the hospital administrator. Nothing at all happened. By the way, I hope this isn't racist, but I'm going to mention the hospital administrator. I'm going to say something that is racist deliberately, but in here in a minute. Was black. Very articulate, dressed fantastic, drove a Continental Mark IV, seemed really sharp and intelligent. Now I'm going to say the thing that is racist, but at one time wasn't considered, considered racist by he was a credit to his race. Now that I got that out of the way, that should win me some friends and influence people. So nothing happened. So then, a year or so later, John Galegas is shot and killed, and I come into work, and his blood is there in the parking lot on the pavement where he was shot. And Eugene Segan, the police officer I told you about, that he pulled in and said, "Oh, Jim, so sorry about John." And I said, "Well, thank you." And he said, "Jim, what's going on with you?" And I said, He said, "Something's going on, I can tell." And I said, "Yep." I said, "I'm waiting for the hospital administrator to show up." And he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm just waiting for him to show up." So then the hospital administrator pulled in his Lincoln Continental Mark IV. I just love fucking saying that. And got out of his car, and I went over to meet him. And I said, "Mr. Dickinson, there is John's blood on the ground there. Now are you going to do something? Are you going to put a gate across that parking lot, that entrance over there, and are you going to get bulletproof vests?" And he said, "No, no, I don't think so, Jim. I'm not going to do that. Maybe I'll get you guys a horse." That was the wrong fucking, well, whatever he said would have been the wrong, unless he'd have said, "Yes, you'll get that gate and you'll get bulletproof vests, and I'll do whatever I can to make this, safer." And so he said the wrong thing. So then I went back and I told him that he needed to get bulletproof vests and put a gate across there. And he said he laughed and said, "Maybe to get us a horse." And I said, and so I forget exactly what Eugene said. Something, I said, "Well, I gotta go to work," because the doctors were just starting to pull into the parking lot. So I got out of the police car, and I forget how long Eugene sat there in the car. And I went over, and every doctor that got out, I went over and I said, "Dr. Skinner, Dr. Piper, Dr. DeMaria, Dr. who, I said, there's John Galegas' blood on the ground. I just talked to the hospital administrator. I told him we needed a gate across over here, and I told him he needed to get bulletproof vest. And he said they're not going to do it." And every one of the doctors, and I continued to do, every one of them that pulled in, I told them, that every one of them said, of course, something a little bit different. "Well, I'm going to go see him right now," or "How much do the bulletproof vests cost, Jim?" And I said, I have no idea. And he said, you guys will get bulletproof vests. If I have to, like one doctor, if I have to pay for them myself, one doctor said, "Well, I'm going to go see the medical staff will pay for those." And they went in. So about an hour and a half later, the assistant administrator of the hospital, Huber, forget his first name right now. See, I had worked, when I got out of high school, I worked welding for about 10 years as a welder, and spent most of my time underneath railroad cars or underneath trucks, welding trucks or railroad cars. And then I got married at age 26, and my wife had before I married her, she had just started a tropical fish shop. I ended up quitting the welding and working at the tropical fish shop for 4 years, and then pretty quickly ended up getting into security, and then ended up working at St. Joe Hospital, the first hospital I worked at. So So I didn't have any work office experience, any, when you're a welder with a hood on, down, and you're welding. So I didn't know what a suck ass was. I didn't know what a kiss ass was. I didn't know that any human being would degrade themselves so fucking much for a job, for a chance of a promotion or something. And that the assistant administrator, every time I saw him, he had his nose up the ass of the hospital administrator. I was appalled and sickened by this guy, and surprised and shocked that anybody would ever, that any man could sink so low for a fucking job or for anything. So he came out. I was surprised to see him coming out because the hospital administrator was in the hospital, and I never saw Mr. Huber when he wasn't following at 4 paces or whatever, the hospital administrator. And he came out and acted like he was walking to his car, which I thought, where in the fuck are you going without being told to go there, or going with the hospital administrator or something or other. And so then he acts, I guess I don't need to go. He says, oh, Jim, I guess I don't need to go to my car. And I thought, I don't think you fucking even, I was wearing a name tag. I didn't think you even knew my fucking name. That's an exaggeration, but he said, oh, by the way, we're going to put a gate across here, and we're going to get bulletproof vests for you guys. And then he went back into the hospital. So I stuck around. It took him a while to get an order in for bulletproof vests, and maybe Law Enforcement Equipment Company had to order them in or something. And so I decided that I would stick around until they put a gate up, and then I was sticking around until they got the vest. And then that was such a bad neighborhood, and we had so few people, it was unusual. I think about the only place I ever went to, other than filling up, the Cushman scooter with gas across the street. I never had never been sent anywhere, but they sent me to Law Enforcement Equipment to pick up the 10 bulletproof vest. I didn't put one on, though. I didn't wear one. Because I didn't want to get it dirty, because I knew that I was going to be going to work someplace else, because I knew that my name had been circled, and that the first opportunity that they would fucking fire my ass. And I didn't want to give them because I wouldn't have fucking cared, but I wasn't going to give them the opportunity to think that. So I applied as soon as I brought the vest back and whatever. I went over and applied at Trinity Lutheran Hospital, which was a few blocks away, and went over there. And parking at hospitals it probably is now, always, oh my God, pitiful, terrible, finding a parking spot. I went over there and had a hell of a time finding a parking spot. And finally I thought, I'm just not going to bother with, I'm going to go on home and come back another day or look at some other hospital. And then a spot opened up for me. I pulled into it, went in, went to the personnel department, and said I wanted to put an application in. They had an opening for a security officer, and they said, oh, you have to have, what was it? You have to have 3 years experience as a security officer. And I said, I've got that. Oh, well, you have to have years experience institutional security. I said, I've got that. I said, oh, okay. So let me fill out the paperwork, and then they said, okay, we're going to call the director of security, he's going to come down and take you up to his office and interview you. So I waited, and Bob Ross came down and said, okay, well, I'm going to take you up to my office on the 6th floor. And so we get on the elevator, and on the elevator is Dr. D. Maria, who was on the staff at St. Joseph Hospital and at Trinity Lutheran Hospital. And Dr. D. Maria says, Jim, what are you doing here? And I said, well, trying to talk Mr. Ross here, the director of security, into hiring me. And Dr. D. Maria said to him, you better hire him. Jim's a good man. And I didn't know at the time, but I had the job because the director of security, Mr. Ross, when he interviewed me, he said a thing which, he said to me when he was interviewed, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And when I went, he said he'd call me if I'll let you know about whether you get the job or not. I'm sure he was, well, knowing him later, I know he called around. But I went home, and then one of the things I said, I hope I get the job. They have actually have 3 security officers. They have one for the secretary and the lieutenant, and they have one for security officers, and they have one for the director of security. Every officer gets his own key to the security office. You don't have to wait for the other office. And I said, the only thing is, he said to me, and I said, he said to me, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I said, that bothers me. And about that time, the phone rang. And it was Mr. Ross, and he said, well, Jim, you got the job, and can you, I said, I got to give 2 weeks, no, He said, okay. And right after that, the phone rang, and it was the director of personnel from North Kansas City Hospital, and offering me a job. And I said, well, I already took it at Trinity. And he said, well, I was director of personnel over that. And he said, I just came over here to North Kansas to be much more, And I said, no, I already told I already told Mr. Ross that I would take the job. So I think I'm not sure if I forgot. Well, the point I wanted to make some. I'm sure I forgot. There was some other things I wanted to mention. Since I sort of threw it in here, let me mention that something, and then I'll finish up with this. Remember, I mentioned that one of the 2 guys that shot Dan Stagel, the first security officer there at the hospital, one of them actually ended up working at the hospital when Dan Stagel was in the intensive care unit. I don't know if this shooter, or he wasn't the shooter actually, I guess. I'm not sure if he was working. I'm not sure if he took a job there because there was an opening in food service, or if he took a job there so he could know what was going on. I'm not sure, but anyway, he'd come out to the parking lot and occasionally be out there and have a sandwich out in the parking lot and talk to me. And he asked me a couple times, does that security officer, how's he doing? Does he remember anything? And so then later, he stopped coming out to the parking lot. And then we had John Galegas, who was shot. And then I went over to go to work at Trinity Lutheran Hospital. So when I went over, I was working I started on the day shift. And I told you about the director of security, and man, I got some stories to tell about him, unbelievable stories. My God. And talk about racist. I actually liked him, the director of security, but I did 4 grievances which he lost, and he was so racist. But then this was the 1970s. But anyway, I went over and I was working the day, and I was going to mention. So I went over there, and the first day, they orientated me for a couple days, but because I'd already worked hospital security and whatever, right away on the first weekend or whatever, I was working and working with Walter, Vernon, and so Saturday, we're out in the parking lot, and Walter's telling me, and I'm grateful for the information he was giving me, about this and that and blah, blah, blah. And 3 guys about 20, early 20s come running out the front door of the hospital and run down a hill or whatever. And Walter said, I bet, he says, they've done something. And I said, just young people. And then we got a call on the radio, security call extension, right away. And Walter, I didn't know any, Walter said, that's surgery. And of course, surgery was closed on Saturday and I said, find out what it is, and I'll go get those guys. So they went off down the hill, and they were about a block away, maybe half a block, quite a ways. And I hollered at him. I said, hey, I want to talk to you guys. Oh, no, wait. I said, come on back. I want to talk. Of course, I'm walking towards it. I want to talk to you guys. Come on back here. No, we saw a dead body, and we don't, I said, no, come on back. And then on the radio, Walter freaking out. Stop them, Jim. So, and I didn't want them to, because he was yelling, stop them. They stole some stuff. Stop them. So I turned the volume down on my radio, all the way down, which I don't think I intended. I'm not sure. Anyway, I turned the volume down. And then I got these guys, made contact with these guys. And so then I said, come on, you're coming back. They could have just kept going. I could never have caught them because they had such a, So I said, come back, you're going back with me. Well, when Walter couldn't get me on the radio, and he went outside and couldn't see me, I guess, I was down the hill with him, he called the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. And the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, they would tone things out. If it, shoplifting or something, tone or whatever. Something sort of minor, but over a, the next level would be beep, whatever it was. Let's say that's shoplifting. They wouldn't be, but have a report of shoplifting at Katz's at 31st and Main. Then there was beep beep, armed robbery at such and such a bank or something. And then there was beep beep beep, assist the officer, where every fucking police officer responds to that location, lights and siren. I'd seen police when I was at St. Joe Hospital. Eugene Segan would, one of them be sitting in the parking lot talking to me, and a assist the officer would come out. He'd run over the fucking curb, sidewalk, everything, So Walter called the police, and I did not know, but they put it out, beep, 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 assist the officer, security officer, 31st and Wyandotte, Trinity Lutheran Hospital. So anyway, I had these 3 guys brought into the hospital, and police officers come busting in there, a little bit embarrassing to me. But anyway, so these 3 guys got arrested. went into surgery, and they were doing surgery, but there wasn't anybody in the, and they'd grabbed some stuff, IV stuff and crap or whatever, and ran, took off with it. Okay, the next day, Sunday, I'm making my rounds or whatever, and the dispatcher, which was a switchboard operator, called and said, they need you on 3 East. And so I went up to 3 East, got off the elevator, and there was also, there was a Baltimore entrance that you could come in there. So you could, on the first floor, you could come in from Wyandotte, and on the third floor, you could come in from Baltimore or whatever. And so I'm heading there, and then a gentleman in a suit or whatever said, "Are you hospital security?" And I said, "Yes, sir. What can I do for you?" And he said, "I'm Detective so-and-so with, I think it was narcotics." And he said, "I want to talk to you about the arrest that you made yesterday or whatever." And I said, "Okay, well, can you wait just a second? I need to check over here at the nursing station." And he said, "Well, I can go with you." And I said, "Well, thank you." So we went over there, and the hospital had put out a notice, and we had it sticking on at the nursing stations of a picture of this guy, and say, "This guy has been blah 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 grabbing medications or whatever." And the nurse said, he just reached into our narcotics area there and grabbed some medications or whatever. And I said, "Where is he?" And she said, "Well, I asked him if I could help him, what he was doing. And he asked me where the restroom was." And she said, "I told him right over there." And I said, "Where is he now?" And she said, "He's in the restroom." So when he came out, not only was there a hospital security officer there, but there was a Kansas City, Missouri police narcotics detective to take him into custody. So this was sort of like on Monday morning when the director of security, and I didn't know how he was, but when he came in and I had made arrest on Saturday and Sunday, I didn't know it till about 3 months or 6 months later. Anyway, I made my day with him. Made him because he came in and I'd see later on he'd pick up the phone and call administration and we blah, blah, made her, But what was I going to say? That was like a little aside that I was going to make, and I went, "Oh, I know." So I'm brand new, and between 1 and 3, the day shift security officer, and there was at that time 3 security officers, I think, working the day shift. Yeah. So anyway, I'm the new guy, and I know what needs to be done, and the supervisor, a female, is that now, I did a thing that was racist. What do you call, not feministist, whatever. She came to work. I liked her. Ursula Price. I liked her, and she was nice, but when she came to work, she came to socialize for the entire 8-hour shift that she was there. She would do, things that needed to be done, but she was there for socialization, and I was there to do a job. So anyway, between 1 and 3, when I was there, I'd go to this parking lot. Sometimes it wasn't bad standing there for a couple hours at the gate, making sure only employees parked. But in August it was really, really hot. But I could take the hot, I could take the hot weather. But sometimes it was like 20 below zero in the wintertime. And that was fucking hell. But anyway, I'm there at the entrance, my first week, and in pulls a car. An employee pulls in to get into the parking lot, and guess who it was? It was a guy from food service at St. Joe Hospital, who I did not know at the time was one of the guys who had been responsible for shooting Dan Stagel. And so anyway, the guy in the car was really surprised. And he said, Jim, what are you doing here? And I think if you've watched some of my videos, and you may have figured out that I have a strange and sometimes not a good idea sense of humor or whatever. So I just said to him, I said, well, I had to come over here and keep an eye on you. And he went in and parked his car, and he went into the hospital and quit his job and left. Now, of course, at this point, I had no idea. Let me continue on with something else that I want to mention. When Dan Stagel was shot, right after that, I came into work, and that was, again, I think, the weekend. And so it was daytime, so I was actually in the guard shack. And we had the newspaper there. I looked at the newspaper. 2 black males in Kansas City, Kansas, had robbed a liquor store, and one of them sprayed mace in the eyes of the person. And no, it wasn't the weekend, because the director of security worked Monday through Friday. And I went and I said, real nice guy, Mr. Fisher, Bud Fisher, ex-Kansas City, Missouri police sergeant. I went and I said, Mr. Fisher, look at this, same M.O. I said, we've got to do something about this. I said, we got to let people know that you don't shoot a hospital security officer and get away with this. I said, let me contact the, Kansas City, Kansas. And he said, no. I said, let me go over in person to Kansas City, Kansas and talk to the police. No. And anyway, so I didn't. It was the same 2 guys. We find out later. So later on, a few blocks away from St. Joe Hospital, at a bowling alley, 2 guys kill a contract security guard that was working there. Same 2 guys, we find out later. And then later on, a few blocks away from the hospital, there was a grocery store, and there was an off-duty Jackson County deputy sheriff who worked there. And the 2 guys shot and killed him. And that, the police got them for that. And then we found out that the one guy had been working, Wanted to mention that. Anyway, I've got to bring this to a conclusion. If you watched it to the end, let me know. Say something. I'll give you... what could I say? Well, just tell me, hey, Jim, I watched it all the way to the end, if you did. Thank you very much.